Hello, everyone. Welcome to Good Film Hunting, a podcast about an average couple who are on the hunt for some good movies. In today's world, we are consuming more media than ever, perhaps more passively than ever. But we believe that by documenting and discussing the media we intake, how and what we intake will change for the better. It is important that we don't just become another consumer, but a participant, seeking to engage with the media we consume, so that we can see how our view of the world affects how we perceive it, and how it affects how we perceive the world. In this podcast, we are not only on the hunt for some good movies, but on the hunt for a good discussion. So, lean in, participate, and enjoy. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Good Film Hunting. I beat my co-host to the introduction because we were both warming up, and whoever was brave enough to speak first wins, and I don't know what we win, but I win.
I almost won.
Almost won. You were in second place.
Yes.
But yes, James Scott here as always, and my co-host is
Savannah Scott.
Wow, you did that perfectly
I know.
this time. That was so
I was ready.
fluid. It was perfect. It's perfect. But yes, we are going to be talking and reviewing what movie tonight?
Lawrence of Arabia.
Lawrence of Arabia. Interesting. Very interesting. If you are listening to this podcast for the first time, let me break down the episode structure for you. I've got a list of facts about this movie for Savannah that she most likely does not know most of these. Then we'll share our general spoiler-free thoughts on the movie. We'll recap our favorite moment of the movie. We'll go into spoiler-filled territory. Savannah will do a plot recap. We'll go through our 4 categories that will rate, or a rating system which has 4 categories that will rate for this movie. We'll show our overall rating recommendation at the end, and we'll watch another movie one night. So Savannah, you ready to delve into this?
Mm-hmm.
Before I do, how are you doing?
Good.
Good. How are the babies?
They're good. They're sleeping.
They're sleeping right now.
Right now.
Like all the time now, or just right now?
Oh, they're doing good. Learning things.
Learning
growing,
things. Growing.
Getting cuter by the day.
It's true. Our son just got like his first official haircut, and he grew up like
3 years.
3 years. He's a totally different child. I don't know what happened to the older one.
I know. It's crazy.
He's literally like started acting older too. It's really
I know.
weird.
It is crazy. I don't know if
crazy
it's
how
all
that
in our heads,
happens.
but I feel it.
You feel it. It's true. And our baby is rolling over on her own. She'll just wake up crying. We'll go in there and she'll be on her back and like, what happened? My world has been reoriented.
No, she did that for her nap. She woke up after like a half an hour, rolled over on her back, and just laid there talking to herself and staring into the abyss for a long time. She was happy, and then I moved her into the living room because I thought she was lonely, and then she started crying.
Oh, so you ruined her happy moment.
Yeah, she was having alone time.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, there you go. Alrighty, so let's delve into some facts about this movie. You ready, Savannah?
Mm-hmm.
Naturally, as I've stated many times before, with any historical film or film based off of historical events, there's going to be a lot of facts. So there's a lot of picking and choosing regarding this. What's important to the film itself, what were just some interesting things about, the film versus real life events. So the first piece of information I have is this movie is based on a book written in 1926 called 7 Pillars of Wisdom, which was written by T. Lawrence himself. It's also known as Revolt in the Desert. So I guess it's kind of an autobiography. The film itself was released December 10th, 1962, which is 62 years ago, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And I find that funny that the book was released 1926, and you just reverse 2 and 6, and that's when the movie came out. So yeah, very interesting.
Pretty cool.
Pretty cool. This was directed by David Lean, who I learned is a English film director, producer, screenwriter, and editor, widely considered one of the most important figures of British cinema. He's best known for directing very large-scale epics, similar to Lawrence of Arabia. He has done a couple Charles Dickens adaptations, like Oliver Twist and Great Expectations. I guess I haven't really heard about them before, so I don't know if they're necessarily good. But I did take a look at his other things, and they seem to be critically acclaimed. So maybe we'll look into his stuff in the future. But David Lean was born the 25th of March, 1908, and died the 16th of April, 1991. So he is no longer with us. This film was distributed by Columbia Pictures. It has a whopping runtime of 227 minutes, nearly 4 hours.
That's way too many minutes.
It's true. Although if you take out the long introduction of the music, the intermission and the credits, it's only 216 minutes. Which is actually a considerable amount.
How did you find that out?
I looked it up.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So people have commented on that before.
Well, yeah, because this is one of the longest movies ever made.
Oh, that's funny.
Not the longest, but I guess this is the director's cut, the 227 minutes that was released in theaters. People did, criticize it for being so long, so when they released it, it was only 100 and something minutes. But then they restored the director's cut, which most people have access to now, and I guess is the preferred version amongst most people, interestingly. This had a budget of $15 million. In 1962, there's probably a lot more than it would be today. It had a box office.
That's still kind of a big amount, though.
Right, but I'm thinking of the massive landscape traversing they did.
And all the horses.
That would have been. Those numbers would have been way higher today. This has a box office of $70 million, which is pretty good. The score was by Maurice Jarre. I'm not entirely sure to pronounce that last name. The film stars Peter O'Toole as Lawrence. Guess what else he's done? There's one movie we've heard his voice in before. You'll probably not guess it, but I'm genuinely curious if you'll know.
I don't know.
He did the voice of Ego in Ratatouille.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, he must have been old.
He is pretty old.
Is he still alive?
Yeah, he's still alive.
Wow.
Really?
How old was he back then?
I guess he was young enough.
Well, I guess...
I don't know his exact age.
He's probably 80-something now.
Probably. It also stars Alex Guinness, who did Prince Faisal. Apparently, he played a version of Lawrence in a play called Ross, which was based off the 7 Pillars of Wisdom. And when they went to cast for this movie, they did want to cast him for Lawrence, but he was too old. So they went ahead and decided to cast him somewhere else. I knew as I was watching this movie and I heard his voice, I'm like, I know I've heard this man before somewhere. I can't tell you where. He did the original Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars.
Interesting.
I see that now. I can totally hear the voice.
That's funny.
Yeah. It also stars Anthony Quinn and Jack Hawkins. No one really we'd recognize anything they've done. And I can't really pronounce any of the actor or the characters' names either. So we'll move on. Those are the two I thought the previous Peter O'Toole and Alex Guinness were interesting. As far as historical accuracy goes, naturally, there's going to be a lot of dramatic flair because it's a movie. There was a lot of things played up and a lot of controversial things as far as, some people are concerned with this movie. A lot of people didn't love Lawrence's or Peter O'Toole's portrayal of Lawrence in the movie. And apparently there's a lot of debate as to whether Lawrence was actually as egotistical as they made him in the movie, or he was a lot more reclusive, which is interesting. And you can argue for either case based on his own writings and people's stories of him.
Yeah.
So just this opinion at that point, I guess. It's questionable whether Lawrence was actually involved in the Tafas massacre, the massacre of the Turkish soldiers. Some people do think he was actually there, and some people don't. This was funny. People didn't like that Peter O'Toole was 6 feet and 2 inches tall, which is 9 inches taller than the actual Lawrence.
Wow.
I know.
Well, how tall?
I think he was like 5'5". He was kind of a short guy.
Wow.
I know. Also, there's a lot of speculation about Lawrence's actual sexual orientation. Apparently, the play Ross that Alex Guinness was in focused a lot on that because supposedly he was homosexual. But this movie doesn't delve into that almost hardly at all. Like, the most hints of it you get is his and Ollie's relationship. But even then, that's more of like a brotherly
Yeah, I don't
thing.
get that vibe at all.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. Some people were kind of bothered that they didn't delve into that. All of the interior shots for this film, including all the ones done in tents, which was interesting, were all done in Spain. So, and apparently most of the desert scenes were also done in the deserts of Spain. And I didn't realize Spain had deserts. This was a geography lesson for me. Some of this was done in Jordan and Morocco, but also a few deserts in Spain. So yeah, I had no idea. The film,
not actually in Arabia.
well, Jordan, is that Arabia? Kind of.
So is Arabia not like a place so much as
It's kind of a region, I
Okay.
think. Yeah. The film was originally going to be completely done in Jordan, and the government was extremely helpful in providing logistical assistance, location scouting, transport, extras. The only tension occurred when Jordanian, however you say that, officials learned that one of the English actors, Henry Oscar, did not speak Arabic, but would be filmed reciting the Quran. So apparently that rose a lot of tension, which is interesting.
Wait, so because he didn't speak Arabic, they
yeah.
didn't want him to recite the Quran?
Yeah, something like that.
Interesting.
But permission was granted only on condition that that an actual imam, I guess someone of important religious standing was there to make sure there are no misquotations.
Wow, interesting.
I know,
They
right?
take it seriously.
They do. As far as the film's release go, most Jordan countries did not permit the film because they thought the Arab representation was dishonorable. But Egypt was actually the exception to this because Ollie, the actor who played the character Ollie, whose name actually is Ollie, which is coincidental, I guess kind of got a head start and was trying to justify the film to them in Egypt. Went ahead and let it play, and actually was a great success there, and they didn't feel dishonored by it. So I thought that was good. As far as critical reception go, naturally there's always going to be controversy when you're doing a historical film. But Lawrence of Arabia is widely regarded as one of the greatest films ever made, and in 1991, it was deemed culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant by the United States Library of Congress and selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. I knew that was going to be there. I knew I'd find that fact.
It's one of quite a few movies that we've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for good films, and I guess you're going to meet those two.
It's true.
At times. As far as awards go, this was nominated and won many, many, many awards. As far as Academy Awards go, we know it was nominated for 10. It won 7 of them. Nominations include Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, and Best Screenplay, but it actually won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Art Direction for color, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, and Best Musical Score.
Wow.
I know. Pretty good. Pretty good win. As far as fun facts go for this film, on his first location scouting trip to Jordan, the director David Lean, or Sir David Lean, discovered the remains of the Turkish locomotives and railroad tracks D. Lawrence had destroyed during the Arab Revolution. After 40 years of being in the sun, they hadn't even rusted.
Wow.
I know, that's very interesting. And supposedly, Peter, the actor, during the filming of the massacre, fell off his camel and would have very likely died if his camel hadn't stopped and stood over him while the horses were charging by, because he totally would have been trampled. And supposedly, Lawrence recounts the same exact thing happening to himself during that massacre, which is very,
Who knew camels were so...
I know, right?
Good.
Camel's like, oh, I'm gonna move. You're good. I got you.
That's what animals should do if someone falls off of them.
It's true, right? Not kick them in the head.
Yeah, they don't always do that.
Yeah, sometimes they're a little mean. Goofs for this film. Faisal gives Lawrence 50 men to take to Aqaba, but the group is never seen to have more than 30, even in long shots that show the entire group. So 20 less, but like I never thought to count for some reason.
Yeah.
And during the opening titles, the motorbike is shown from overhead standing on concrete, but when we see it started in the next close-up shot, it's standing on gravel, which I did notice, and it bothered me. Because you're looking at it, and it's clearly on, like, pavement, and then you cut away, and it's, like, in a gravel driveway. I'm like, what?
Wait, what is?
The motorcycle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was weird.
So you noticed that,
Yeah,
too?
I noticed that,
it was very weird. It was just kind of jerking, but whatever. So those are all the facts I selected. There are a lot more. Fun times. Did you, or no, sorry, next section. What are your general spoiler-free thoughts on the movie?
It was very long.
Oh, it's a very long movie.
Way too long.
Way too long. So
Except thinking about it, I don't feel like there's really anything that could have been removed to make it shorter.
Really?
Maybe one scene I feel like they could have gotten rid of, or like one chunk, but like for the most part, I feel like it all kind of was there. It was a experience and a journey. It was interesting, but I don't think I'd ever watch it again.
Like, you'll never watch it again because
I didn't find it exciting enough, and it was very long.
Right.
And it was just kind of a guy movie.
That's fair.
So there were like no women other than the women trilling.
That's true, right.
Sit in the rocks. So it just was kind of like, meh, whatever.
There's nothing about it that particularly drew your fancy.
No, because Lawrence wasn't a particularly heroic character.
No.
That like made it really interesting. Like, The Last Samurai is very much a guy movie too. And Gladiator, just like these movies that are like very like masculine and like fighting and stuff.
Right.
But like the main characters are heroic and good, whereas Lawrence is not. So like I don't really care that much about him.
And there is definitely a female touch in those other movies too.
Yeah, that's true. I always like a little romance in a movie.
Romance, simple, nothing wrong with that. My general thoughts are. Well, to back up, like kind of recounting my history with this movie, like I've heard about this movie for a long time for obvious reasons, kind of like The Matrix. Probably not as much as The Matrix. And I knew the movie itself was very influential to many directors and storytellers. And I didn't realize how influential it was because some people who've literally, large directors who've noted it, specifically influencing their films, include Steven Spielberg, James Cameron with his Avatar movies, duh. George Lucas with Star Wars, duh. Denis Villeneuve with Making Dune, duh. And this film, to my surprise, actually inspired the Dune books. So the books came after this. And
Interesting.
Frank Herbert, who wrote the books, noted that it was one of the greatest influences for writing it. Because I was commenting the whole time, this reminds me of Dune so much. Like, what a coincidence. Like, was this inspired from, well, no, it's historical, obviously, but like, I know they had to have played off of each other in some way, the films at least.
Yeah.
So it's funny that the book itself was inspired by that. So
look at you.
I know.
Good job.
And so it was just neat to see kind of this being a point where, so many things kind of converge, and see why so many people replicate it. And I just think this movie's interesting. That's probably gonna be the word I use to describe it the most. I think it's really interesting because it's a time capsule kind of old movies tend to be a time capsule, but I feel like this one is unique because it is so influential, but it's of such a different era. And I mentioned to you and a couple other people, it's a very unique film because it comes from an era of films that we just do not get anymore in terms of scope and length. It's like, equivalent to War and Peace as far as novels go. Like, you just don't get books like that anymore. And it's very unique and very special. And, like, granted, you could cut so many things out of it, but it's just storytelling worked differently, and it's being driven differently than what we as a culture have been accustomed to. So I could really appreciate those aspects. Like, sure, they're walking through the desert for 20 minutes and we're watching them walk through the desert on these gorgeous landscapes, but like, this is not progressing the plot, so to speak. But it's an experience of the film. And two, like, you feel the walking through the desert that these characters are doing. Like, oh, this kind of pulls me into their shoes a little bit. Like,
and I feel like, too, probably for people back in the 60s, they didn't have the access to the visuals that we have access to.
Right.
And so, like, watching 20 minutes of desert is, like, probably really cool for them because
This
they
is
never
true,
saw,
yeah.
like, we get to
Photos
just Google
and
and look up things all the time. And they were like, ooh, I didn't know this is what this looked like because maybe
Right.
all they had were, like, black and white photos of, like, the desert in, like, school books or something.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. In like 1962, this is, this movie's huge.
No, there were probably color photos back then.
There were, but like, to have something quite of this nature, no, it wasn't, as big. Whereas now it's like a dime a dozen. I think my biggest problem with this, there's something, it's not a perfect movie, obviously. I can see why it's very influential, but I think one of the issues I had watching it, which I just tend to have with old movies, is I tend to watch it with a more observatory eye, as opposed to sitting back and just like having fun, like Oppenheimer. I tend to watch them and like, it's just more of like, ooh, this is fascinating. This is the way they did things back then, kind of thing. Different time and era, so I feel like I'm removed from experiencing it in the same way. And I just, maybe I can get past that one day, but I feel like that kind of prohibits me from being able to enjoy it to an extent. Although that's not always the case, because I feel like with Rear Window, I wasn't thinking that the whole time, because I was pretty invested.
We were having fun with Rear Window.
Yeah. Let's move on to favorite moments of the movie. Did you have a favorite moment of the movie? Whether it was funny or a moment that just stood out as being interesting or visually striking, emotionally gripping?
Not really.
Not really?
Yeah. Not really.
Okay. I have the scene where we meet Ollie's character for the first time being my favorite moment, when Lawrence and his escort are at the well in the middle of the desert, getting the water, and, it's kind of tense to begin with, but then they relax and it's completely flat. And the scout keeps like, checking the surroundings in this completely flat environment. And like suddenly you get like this little itty bitty black line on the horizon. And it's a very long and static, drawn out shot of this line just getting bigger and bigger as this person's approaching. And I thought it was tense because like you could see this person and they can probably see you too. So like what are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
You're just watching him get closer at this point. And it just was visually really interesting.
Yeah, it was.
Really cool to see. I thought visually this film was just really good. Are you ready for the 5-minute plot recap?
Yes.
Because I know you were struggling following the plot a little bit with this one.
I was. I just looked it up though, so hopefully I
just looked it up. All right, we're exactly at 9:40. You have till 9:45. You ready?
Yes.
Ready, set, go.
Okay, so the movie starts with a motorcycle and a guy cleaning it and then driving away, which later it comes to have absolutely no relevance in the movie whatsoever.
Oh, it's the death of the character. He died. So it was his funeral. Yeah, he died.
Sorry, okay, I remember the funeral part, but I didn't remember the part of him dying. Sorry,
Yeah,
he was
he died
on a motorcycle, going on a drive, crashed, died, and then it was his funeral. and people were being asked, like, what they thought about him and stuff, and no one really had a real answer. And then it cuts to back when Lawrence was alive at the Navy place. And he's just kind of derpy and, like, doesn't really seem like he belongs, and he's just kind of awkward. And he gets told that he's gonna go talk to the Prince Faisal in Arabia about something regarding the war.
Right.
And so he's like, okay, and he goes and he travels with his guide, and they go to, he and his guide are traveling, and he is at a well, and that's when we meet Ali, who is the Sharif. Sharif Ali. Yeah, which is like some sort of social standing. Okay. I don't know exactly what it is. Like maybe like a tribe leader. I don't know.
Okay.
But anyway, Sharif or Ali kills the guide, and then Lawrence is like, "What are you doing? And why did you do that?" And then he kind of tells him his mission, and then they go together to the tribe. And there we kind of meet some characters, some young boys that want to be Lawrence's servants are introduced, and then they all travel to visit Prince Faisal, and he's there, and he has, like, all kinds of wealth, and he's talking about how great he is and stuff, and Lawrence kind of tells him the gist of what they're trying to do, which is something involving the Turks, because they're invading.
Right.
And so they decide to travel. Prince Faisal gives Lawrence men to go take over a city. I think I slept through, or I don't know. I don't know if I slept through that part, but anyway, goes to take a city, and they travel, and they have to make it across the Devil's Anvil.
Oh, right.
Which is what they call the very hot stretch of desert. And they're traveling day and night, like kind of resting during the day and traveling at night. And a guy falls off of his camel and, like, gets lost, and Lawrence feels very strongly to go back and get him. So he goes back and gets him and rescues him, and it's this whole big thing. But anyway, they make it to the town, or the city. They
encounter a different clan first.
Oh, yes, they encounter a different clan. And they kind of get in trouble for drinking out of their well. But then they kind of, like, join forces. Right. And they're, like, friends, and so they all go together to the city. But a fight breaks out before they get there. And the guy that fell off the camel was the perpetrator of the fight, and Lawrence ends up shooting him, even though they're kind of like friends, which is kind of sad. And then they make it to the city, Aqaba. They take it over. They kind of like establish that as their fortress. And then Lawrence goes back to Cairo to kind of tell the news and stuff. And he brings the 2 young teenage boys with him, like his servants. And they are traveling to Cairo. One of the boys gets caught in quicksand. And then Lawrence has to kill him too. Or no, Lawrence doesn't have to kill him. He just feels responsible for the death of that boy because he drowned in the quicksand. And they make it to Cairo. He goes back to the Navy headquarters. Kind of asks for reinforcements and stuff, and they give him what he needs. And he goes back. And they kind of start this, like, dramatic thing where they just start attacking the Turks in a very, like, hooligan way, where they, like, blow up the trains, and it's kind of chaotic. Right. And then the other young boy ends up having a detonator in his pocket or something, and he has to get killed, too. Lawrence has to kill him. And Lawrence is kind of, like, talking about how he's been, like, enjoying killing people. And his friends are like, you're just kind of going crazy, you need to rest, blah, blah, blah. But all of the Arabs, like, worship Lawrence and think he's amazing. They give him, like, the white robes of a Sharif, and, like, he's, like, this deity to them. And then, what happens after that? They have, like, a final battle with the Turks, like a massacre, and Lawrence is just, like, killing everyone mindlessly. There is a scene where he goes to this city, and he's, like, disguised, and these bad guys capture him and beat him, but I don't really remember exactly what happened in that time.
Oh, yeah, he was trying to... essentially he was losing the allegiance of the Arabs because they kept finding what they needed to and were going back, and it was kind of left with him and like 10 guys, and he was, Lawrence in his egotistical way is like, well, I'm going to go start a revolution, you guys can come with me or not, and then he gets caught and then beaten, and then he loses heart, and then he goes back to Cairo. It's like, I give up. But then the general's like, you can't give up, we need you. And then Lawrence is like, oh, okay, fine. Just give me what I need.
Yeah, okay, so that
then the
happened beforehand.
Yeah.
And then and then they massacre the Turks, and Lawrence is obviously losing his mind, and, you know, just kind of chaotic and stuff.
Right.
And then everything ends.
It ends.
Yeah.
Which is like...
Eventually, it ends. And Lawrence is... The end is kind of fuzzy to me. He's, celebrated.
They take over a city, Damascus.
Oh, yes.
The Arabs want to establish their democracy. But
Yeah.
of course, you know, they've never done any sort of government this way before. But there's too many conflicting opinions, and Lawrence kind of just leaves.
Yeah, and then it's done.
It's done.
The end.
I'm like, okay, that was an abrupt ending.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's technically those 7 minutes.
Wow.
I know. Good job. Very long movie to condense in that time.
I know.
I'm surprised you didn't emphasize the walking as much as you could have.
There was a lot of walking.
Walking. As I mentioned when we were watching the movie, you know, the joke about Lord of the Rings is there's so much walking. So much walking. They could have removed all the walking. But if you think that was a lot of walking, watch this movie and you will be thankful
You'll
for
be
the
begging
amount
for Lord of the Rings.
for the amount of walking they did there. Okay, so let's move into our rating system. We've got 4 categories I'll rate on a scale of 1 to 5. This includes entertainment, production quality, writing, and content. Savannah, on a scale of 1 to 5, what would you give this film for entertainment and why?
Probably give it a 2.
Wow, okay.
It just was kind of it was. See, I'm trying because 3. Between 2 and 3, it was mildly interesting. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't super engaging, and I kind of was just like, when is this going to be over?
Okay.
Again, this is a guy movie. Mm-hmm. Just a lot of, killing and massacring and walking, and it was just kind of, you know, it was interesting. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll give it a 3.
No, if 2 is what you want to give it a 2.
It just was, I don't know, it wasn't my favorite. It didn't have the typical plot you would expect of today's movies, maybe. That's probably why it was just kind of snooze.
Okay. I mean, I thought it was kind of you didn't love Dune 2, but that was more for the sci-fi elements of it. But it was just kind of following a character as opposed to a plot, maybe. Well, no, Dune is more of a conventional plot.
Yeah, I think I'll give it an official 3.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, because I feel 2 might be a little harsh, but yeah, probably 3.
Because if we gave it, you might have given that 1. No, you gave it a 2. Because that one we were like, oh my goodness, just end this. Mm-hmm. Whereas this one, I didn't quite get those vibes from you.
No, not
quite.
No.
Because, well, we can go production quality, because I feel like there was a little more to glean from here.
Yeah.
Maybe. Entertainment, I gave it a 3. As described earlier, the film is more of an experience rather than just pure entertainment. Mm-hmm. So you're there with the characters and it's taking its time and you feel them walking through the desert and they're building suspense. This reminds me a lot of 2001: A Space Odyssey, where they just have some shots that go on and on and on. And I think Space Odyssey... Sorry, 2001 is, I guess, the better way to refer to it. It has some shots that go on way longer than this does. But, it takes its time and it builds suspense through just, holding on to those shots for so long. And, is it gonna end? Oh, they're still going. But I think they were going for a particular vibe. And a certain intensity and a certain epic feeling that I think they did get for the most part. The film, because it is, a lot of the shots are just so big, you feel so isolated, and you feel the desert in a very unique way. Mm-hmm. I think that this film captured probably in a way I haven't seen other movies do, because you do feel very isolated and very much like you're just walking forever. In the film, it drags, but it drags in a way I think that it wants to drag. So it wants to do this, it's intentional, so I can appreciate that. It doesn't necessarily make it fun. My biggest issue was that, and we kind of discussed this, the plot was kind of hard to follow. Like there were a lot of parts going on, and it shouldn't have been as hard to follow as it was, considering like how much of it was just stuff going on screen. And I found the second half of the film far less interesting than the first half, which even the second half had a lot more action, but like just something about it, like I almost preferred the long landscape shots to the action scenes. I don't know what it was, but I feel like once they took once they made it back to Cairo the second time, Lawrence and the boy, I felt like everything after that I just wasn't nearly as interested in. But yeah, it is what it was. So yeah, 3, I give it a 3 because there was enough going on for me to be entertained by, to appreciate it, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm enjoying this kind of thing.
Yeah.
What would you give this on a scale of 1 to 5 for production quality?
Probably like a 4. I thought it was good. It was visually appealing. I felt like the scenes were cool. I liked the desert aspect. I think my favorite part was all the camels and the horses.
Oh, there were a lot of camels and horses.
There were a lot of camels and horses, like thousands, which was fun. We always like seeing real animals in movies.
Right.
And I thought it was, like, I liked the costumes too. Like, I liked Lawrence's garb.
His white garb.
His white garment. That was kind of fun. I thought it was just generally well done. Like, the videography was good. Like, the quality was pretty good. The acting was pretty good.
Right.
I felt like I was there watching.
Felt pulled in.
I did. So yeah, I'd give it a 4.
Yeah, I give it a 4 as well. A lot of it was really well done. It looks really nice. The acting is good, and the cinematography is really well done, and the scale of the film just feels ginormous. And there was no CG in 1962, so real actors and extras and animals had to film the frame completely. So like, the massacre, those are all real people acting, not being massacred, obviously.
Hopefully.
But governments actually lended their armies to this movie being made so they could have enough extras.
Oh, really?
So like when you see, the Turkish army walking, that's an army.
Oh, interesting.
Or I'm sure a lot of the Arabs extras were, army members dressed up, because where else are you going to get that large amount of people already together that easily?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And also, just a lot of animals. There were a lot of animals, but it was fun to see all those animals.
I like seeing animals in movies.
I love that because, everything had to be practical. The train wrecks had to be real. The explosions had to be real. Because of that, there was definitely a sense of grounded realism that I think is very hard to replicate in movies these days, because it is so easy to fall back on using CG. Not that CG is inherently bad, but like you kind of have the Christopher Nolan scenario where like you're not necessarily getting governments to back your film, so you don't have nearly enough extras there for like Dunkirk. So it's kind of like, I can appreciate you not wanting to use CG, but it feels like maybe you're lacking a little something Rizzy in the background.
Rizzy?
Rizzy in the background.
What?
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Do you not like that?
I don't know if that's...
You're lacking something extra in the background. Like, there just needs to be a little more filler in the screen.
So that's interesting. So I guess, because Dunkirk didn't feel very big.
No.
It felt pretty tiny.
It's supposed to have 300, there was supposed to be 300,000 soldiers on the beach. At no point does it ever look or feel like that.
No, not at all. That's so interesting.
Yeah. So in that sense, CG would be helpful, but like you're not getting quite the same support for movies that this film would have gotten to have Army. So that it's just very unique. Once again, I think where the production quality starts to fall flat is one, older movie, different techniques. I can't really judge it purely based off that, but there were several blocking scenes and several moments that just felt kind of weird and awkward to watch, and I just was like, I know this. I'm supposed to be feeling intensity or suspense here, but I'm not, and it just feels kind of weird. I think their portrayal of trying to show Lawrence killing the one guy who needed to be executed for committing the crime against the other tribe. Like, that was, in and of itself, the moment was intense and gripping because of his relationship with this character. But he later confesses to someone else, I guess his general, that, I don't want to go back because I enjoyed killing him. But in the moment, I didn't think that whatsoever, other than the fact that he shot him a lot of times.
He emptied his entire gun on him.
I just thought maybe, it was a moment of being really upset and just kind of just letting it loose, but I didn't get the impression he, enjoyed it. So that was just kind of weird. And I thought that Lawrence's state of being kind of crazed in the massacre scene was just really awkward to see, because he was walking around, awkwardly fumbling with a gun, trying to kill people, and then he has a knife and his hands are bloody, but it's like I know you're crazy, but there were better ways this could have been done. And I just felt some of the acting from Peter O'Toole just kind of made it difficult to interpret what Lawrence was feeling at times. I just couldn't connect to him. And I know he was supposed to be a really complicated character, but I just felt like while he was quirky and egotistical, I never really got the more nuanced side of him. So I think that's what holds it back from being a 5. But very well made movie. What would you give this on a scale of 1 to 5 for writing? Which includes, dialogue, plot, characters, character arcs. No romance, so automatically it can't be 5.
Loses points.
Loses points.
Probably a 3.5.
3.5. Okay.
The only thing keeping it from being a 4 is just the fact that the plot was kind of hard to follow.
Right.
But I felt like it's based on a true story, so I think it was pretty straightforward, and I thought the characters were. I wouldn't say they were particularly well fleshed out. We didn't really get to know deeply any of the characters.
Right.
But they were decent. I guess.
Right. I mean, you sympathized with some of them.
Yeah, I sympathized with them, and I felt them as characters, but I wouldn't say that they were particularly deep.
Right.
I thought the acting and the script was pretty decent too. Yeah, 3.5.
Okay.
Not amazing, not outstanding, but not terrible.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to give this just yet, so I'm going to talk through it. Once again, I had a hard time following the plot and Lawrence's motives, which kind of just took away from my appreciation or enjoyment. And I don't know if there was a way they could have made that easier, or if it was supposed to be difficult intentionally to follow because there was so much going on. I do see this being a film I can appreciate more and more over time, especially if I do happen to watch it again. But, obviously my judgment of this is only based on this one viewing experience. So if I watch this again, maybe I'll revisit it in a different review then. But I didn't feel as invested in Lawrence as I wanted to, and felt kind of disconnected from him. Once again, I said Peter O'Toole's acting just didn't really, and I guess the writing plays into this too, just don't really show his conflicting interests really well as to, his different sides and what he wanted versus what he wanted for everybody else, and what did he actually want, which I think is supposed to be kind of the case. He's a very just complicated person, as all people are, and even at the funeral at the beginning of the film, where they're nobody really knew who this man was, so
yeah,
I think that was kind of the point. And maybe if I went back and watched it knowing what I was getting into, I could appreciate that more. There were lots of shocking moments. I don't know how much of them are based off of, reality, but like the killing of the man he saved from the desert. That was a shock when it was revealed. Oh no, it's that guy. Like that was a compelling moment.
That was a compelling moment. That was probably the most compelling moment of the movie, honestly.
Or the death of the one servant boy caught in the quicksand. Him trying to save him, but realizing there's nothing I can do, and I have to keep this other boy who's deeply connected to this one from, freaking out while this other kid drowns in sand.
Yeah.
This is compelling and terrifying.
Yeah.
I definitely can see, based on the film, like I can see why the Arabs respected this Lawrence a lot, just because of all the things he led them to do. But so I could see from their perspective why they loved him. I just couldn't see from his perspective why he loved them. Like, what about them was so appealing to him personally? Like, was he just using them? Or was there something about them that just... Because, like, he loved the desert, and, like, you look at the beautiful scenes, like, oh, okay, like, yeah, I get that. But, like, was he actually in love with these people? And if so, why? They didn't really explain that very well, I thought. I just...
Yeah.
Like, they were following him, but, like, why did he feel compelled to keep coming back to them? And it almost just seemed like it was almost for his own interest. And if it was, then that's what it was. And I think a lot of the confusion around Lawrence's character kind of is justified by Lawrence not really knowing himself what his motivations are. Because there's the one scene, which I've heard referenced before, where Lawrence and the boy make it to the canal, and there's that person on the other side of it, and he like stops and shouts, "Who are you?" to them a couple times, and it's like focused on Lawrence, and that's supposed to be like a commentary on like the film's theme of Lawrence asking, "Who am I?"
Yeah.
So it's an actual character moment in addition to external circumstances. So in that sense, like, it makes sense why there's so much confusion around this character. Yeah. And as I'm explaining that, I can kind of see the brilliance of the writing coming out a little bit more. The ending was sad and very disconnected and kind of tragic, because like he helped the Arabs get Damascus and kind of start working towards their goals of becoming their independent unit, but like just things fell out of his favor and there was too much hostility, and he had just kind of left, and there was no real goodbye to the friends or the characters that he'd spent this entire movie with. He just left, and it was like, oh, this just feels really sad and disconnected.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. I think the strongest point in the movie for me was his relationship with Ollie and just how that transformed over the film. Because it started with this very hostile engagement of, hey, you just killed my friend. Like, well, he was drinking from my well and he didn't ask. And then Lawrence commenting, like, unless you guys unite, you're never going to be anything better than this. And Ollie's like, who cares? But then, like, to see his, they kind of have a hostile relationship to Ollie having more and more respect for him, to eventually being the same one when Lawrence is down and out and wants to go back. And then to the point even when Lawrence starts to go crazy, Ollie's like, you're kind of insane. You need to tone it back a bit.
Yeah.
And it was sad there was no real reconciliation between their characters at the end, but I thought theirs was the best aspect of it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was interesting. I like that. And as you mentioned, there's no women in the story. That doesn't necessarily make it bad, but it was just very interesting. Like, no romantic interests, and I guess that had to do with Lawrence being homosexual, maybe. But it was just like, wow, this is a dude movie. There's just guys everywhere.
I know. A little sad, but
a little sad. So I guess I can give this movie a 4 out of respect, because as I'm talking about it, I can see what they were trying to do a bit more. And it could, my appreciation, I do see it potentially growing in the future. But yeah, I think just a lot of it comes down to the intentionality of Lawrence just not knowing himself who he is. So we don't know what to make of him as we're watching him, which is, I can sympathize with that. Okay, let's go into our last category, content. This includes weighing the more negative aspects of the story or the actual, or what we're seeing on screen versus the story they're telling? Does it fit in? Is it out of place? Is it offensive? On a scale of 1 to 5, what would you give this for content and why? Considering this is, PG-13 war film.
There wasn't really a whole lot of language.
No.
Or if any.
Right.
No sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
There was violence. Nothing majorly bloody.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably give it a 3 for content, too.
Oh, okay.
Pretty middle.
Pretty middle?
3 or 4. Well, no, actually, probably a 4. I feel like a young child could watch this movie.
Maybe. There's some bloody moments, for sure, which...
Not like a young child, but like a 10-year-old or something.
Yeah.
So maybe, how about a 4?
Yeah, I gave it a 4 as well. There's some kind of bloody moments, but none of it's really out of place, because it's either during a battle or it's the results of battle. And this film is about a violent culture. So in a sense, like, the violence of just the culture itself kind of does... I don't know, like, that could be a 5 in and of its... You could argue a 4 or 5 either way. I go with 4 just because it is... You have to approach it with a little more caution, I think. Yeah, there's not much language or gore otherwise. No sexual content, as you stated. Lawrence does get beaten, which is more implied rather than we see it, but we do kind of see the after result. And then there's the moments when Lawrence kind of does go crazy and go on a killing spree several times, even though we don't actually see him physically killing people. Someone gets hacked with a sword, like, off camera, but, like, right next to it, which you can hear the sound, and it's like... But I'd give it a 4. I think, like, it's a pretty clean movie, and everything fits in for the most part. It's just... You do have to... It's a heavier... Some aspects of it heavier, so not little kids, but older preteens, young teens, I would say would be fine.
Yeah. Could they get through the entire movie, though?
That's a great question.
Probably not.
Probably not. It took us 3 nights to get through this movie. Which is fine. That's fine. It was a long movie. All right, so to round it all up, what would you give this entire film on a scale of 1 to 5? And what are your final thoughts as you send it off? Does it make our list? Does it not? Why?
I would give it a 3 all around. I thought there were some interesting aspects. For the most part, it was just a little bit snooze for me. It was a little slow. It was a little guy-ish. Lots of just... I don't know. Like, it was somewhat interesting, but for the most part, it was just a little... It was not super stimulating.
It's not stimulating, okay.
I wouldn't vote it for the list of, like, good films.
Right.
Even from, like, a technical standpoint, I'm not well-versed enough in that to be like, I think it's technically good. Like, Oppenheimer, for example. Like, I'd be fine if I never watched Oppenheimer again. But, like, even just from a technical standpoint, it's obvious that Oppenheimer deserves to be on that list. And I probably wouldn't vote this one on there.
Okay. I give it a 3.5. I have a lot of respect for the film and wouldn't be opposed to watching it again. I don't know if that probably won't happen anytime soon. But if the moment occurred, I would not be opposed to it. And I felt like some aspects about the story was somewhat confusing and convoluted, and I can see why this film, for its day and age, was so influential. Like, you can see why so many people look up to this, so many big directors of the day. I would recommend it. It's kind of like a once-in-a-lifetime thing because this is such an iconic movie.
Yeah.
Like, this is very influential, and it's just neat to see, the origins and roots of something. But I definitely wouldn't recommend it with the same type of hype as I would with Oppenheimer, where I'm just like wowed by every single moment of it. Whereas this one is just like this is interesting, kind of thing. I don't know if I would put it on the list just because it's it's a good movie, but one, you don't put it on the list, so we both have to agree. And two, wasn't impactful in the way I wanted it to be. Like, talking about the writing brings up a lot of interesting things, like about how they chose to portray the character. And it's not like every single film has to be impactful in a certain way. You know, we talk about The Prestige a lot, right? A favorite of ours. Not great characters, but so many thought-provoking, you know, explorations of human nature. This one is an exploration of human nature, but it's more about this specific person as opposed to the nature of humans.
And there's no growth that we see.
Well, there's no growth in The Prestige either. It's just I think the difference between this is it's the single man as opposed to The Prestige, where it's two human beings repeating this pattern of just human nature and what comes of human nature when you let it do that. Will always happen. So I think that's kind of the difference here and there. So this is an interesting movie, but I just don't see it being like a family classic. Like, let's sit down and watch Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, no.
But I have a hope for this movie, to kind of finalize my thoughts, because I felt similar to Rocky when I first watched it. I watched it and was like, oh, that's interesting. You know, I can see why people love it. And then I watched it a second time, like, I like this movie. I love this movie. I like Rocky. Like, it's very different. It's paced very different. But it's so endearing and unique. And I just have to accept, you know, it's of a different time and era. And we both agree the second one's our favorite, right?
Yeah.
But I just, you know, the first viewing I felt very, very similarly to the way I feel about this one. But the second viewing, I'm like, because I knew what I was getting into, I could appreciate it and love it all the more. So I have hope for this one. I see there being a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
So that brings us to the end of our review of Lawrence of Arabia. Thank you all for listening. We hope you've been inspired to have some more conversations around the movies you're watching. Let us know what you thought about this movie in the comments. Let us know what you thought about our reviews. And until next time, good film hunting.